Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. This week, our guest is Lucy O'Hagan, who is a very inspirational person. She has been on a fascinating journey, a journey that we couldn't do justice to in just 1 hour. However, in this episode, we did cover a lot. I primarily asked Lucy onto the podcast to talk about her work with Wild Awake, a fantastic organisation designed to help people connect with themselves, their communities, and to the non human life on Earth in a deeper way. Wild Awake, through ancestral skills, ethnobotany, wildlife tracking and trailing, as well as rites of passage training, invite people to relate to the natural world in a way that we have forgotten. Part of this rites of passage training with Wild Awake includes a process which is often described as a wilderness fast or a vision quest, which is an ancient ceremony involving several days of fasting in a natural world with little to no human company nor modern distraction. This conversation attempts to delve deeper into this rich process, why Lucy felt a call to wilderness fasting, and how it deepened her relationship with the land and inspired her work in Donegal with Wild Awake. We also talk about the rise of ethno-nationalism in Ireland and consider how, combined with economic precarity and misinformation online, that this racism that we see might be seen as a symptom as a significant disconnection many Irish people feel to their language, to their tradition, to their stories, and to their land. Lucy also shares some of her observations facilitating ceremonies and from her extended time on the land in Donegal, including the inherent queerness of the natural world. This was a beautiful chat which I think might serve as necessary nutrition for many given the disconnection, polarisation and violence going on close to home at the moment. Lucy's stories reminds us and reminds me of our collective need to listen to the natural world, to learn about the ways of our ancestors, and to pay homage to these practices and worldviews. You can find more information about Wild Awake and Lucy through the link below. And as always, thanks for making the time to listen. All the best, guys. Lucy O'Hagan, welcome to the Earthly Delights podcast. Thanks for making time. How are you keeping? What's the crack?
Doing well, yeah. Early morning start today. But yeah, this is a busy time of year for me, so happy to be able to make the time to be here with you this morning.
Good. Is the early start because of me?
Yes. I'm just
Okay.
taking the lions where I can get them these days. They're few
Yeah,
and far between. But
that's fair.
yes, I got up early for you.
Wow, I feel equally special now.
Good.
Um, for people who aren't familiar with yourself or your work, and I know it's a very difficult question, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and maybe how you came to be where you are?
hmm Yeah, and it's interesting every time I get asked this question. I'm not quite sure what's going to come out, but I'll give it a go. So yeah, it's Misha Lucini Hí Hagan. Mo fran am nach na siad iad agus si é agus as mé first me ach tá mé mo hunis in eki Falcara in Tyrconnell. Anish. So yeah, my name is Lucy O'Hagan. I take they, them, and she, her pronouns. Um, I am from Belfast, but I live now just outside Fulcara in Donegal, in the Donegal Gaeltacht. I'm learning Irish. I didn't learn Irish growing up at all. I might have done a couple of years in school, but that was all forgotten. But that's been a big part of my journey moving here, living here. It's a place that I am deeply familiar with. I've been coming here since I was a child, so very much in love with the land and the community and the people here, and then just the richness and the depth of the culture. Um, yeah, I run a project called Wild Awake. I rarely describe it as a business, but it's my livelihood. And yeah, through that project, actually, it's 10 years next year that I've been doing this work of, I suppose, working at that kind of intersection between human and nature. I'm working to dissolve that binary, particularly through like embodied engagement with the land, through practicing ancient skills. And that's taken me in lots of different directions. At the moment, I describe my work as rekindling ancestral life ways for decolonial futures, and that feels very present for me and very alive. Yeah, my work's deeply political, and also, yeah, I suppose for me, there's no way of separating that from connection to the earth, connection to community, connection to these more ancient ways of being with the land and relating with the land and with one another. Um, yeah, there's a little flavor.
Ah, thanks. I like how every answer is different, right? Because I've heard you being asked this question before and we got a totally different answer. It's just like whatever feels strongest, I guess, at the time.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And it's been a little while since I've done a podcast. Normally I do them in the winter when I'm in reflection mode. So this is kind of
okay.
what's happening at the moment. It's kind of a ripe time for change in these months.
Absolutely. That's my job to kind of force you into a bit of reflection right now.
Yeah, no bother, no bother. It's the oral culture. It's always changing.
Absolutely. Um, well, there's several reasons why I wanted to talk to you for this podcast. One is that I'm very invested in using a kind of personal practice, like whether it be a meditation practice, reflection practice, contemplative practice. It's something that really feeds you, but I'm also very interested in using that then for bigger change in the community locally and nationally. And that's that's one big reason why I was connected to your work because I really felt that. I really felt that it wasn't, and particularly in the culture now of wellness and the industries, it can feel very self-serving and almost overtly individualistic. And I really appreciated Wild Awakes, clear. Yeah, we do this for ourselves, but then immediately we're doing it for something bigger. And it's like this, like you said, like a harmony between the interbeing. And I really appreciated that. So I would love. I'm sure it will be expanded upon in this conversation. And then the other big reason was that, and we'll get to it. Very interested in the idea of a vision quest
Mm.
and a kind of a practice or a portal in which we can connect deeper to the land. And yeah, I really want to ask more about that. But the next question I thought would be nice was that right now, I know the answer might be different tomorrow. But right now, what do you think was the most pivotal moment which either encouraged you or yeah incited you to go in this direction either and then yeah in the direction of well I care a lot about the natural world and I care a lot about what's happening on a political level as well and was there a moment or moments where you said right well I want to be able to use these all.
Can I give three?
No, sorry, only two. No, no, three, sorry.
The first one I think was like when I was I think I was 24. I was squatting in Dublin, and kind of part of yeah, like queer anarchist squatting culture, and we were squatting a big building in the middle of Dublin, and we were just undergoing a really violent eviction. And while that eviction was happening, I had signed up to do forest school training. So if people aren't familiar with forest school, it's yeah, a pedagogy that engages with particularly young people, working with the same group of learners in the same natural environment over a long period of time, to connect them with the natural world, but also grow their resilience and confidence through supporting them to like assess and take risks. So I'd read about this in a book called The Last Child in the Woods. That would be another pivotal moment, reading that book. But yeah, I had signed up for the course and it was beginning, and out of the blue, we got evicted, and so there was this huge like surge of community support. We managed to resist the eviction, and the kind of squatted area was open to the public. So that was kind of happening, and then I was going to the woods in Wicklow actually, each day for, I think the course lasted 4 days at this particular time, and learning how to light a fire, learning how to use tools. Like as a 24-year-old, like I'd never really been taught how to use like tools, how to light a fire, what plants were edible. I had like interest in this already, obviously, but there was something about that way of learning that was really engaging, and it really lit a fire in me. Um, so that was a really pivotal moment in realizing like this is what I want to do. I've been teaching kind of environmental education in classrooms in schools before then, but just could see the ineffectiveness of it. So that really set me on that path, which kind of, snowballed into doing this like, so-called like bushcraft training and ethnobotany and wildlife tracking. And then I suppose the second pivotal moment was when I met, my teacher, Lynx Filden. So amazing, very inspiring woman who really kind of walks the walk. And she came to Galway in 2017, and we went out and built a coracle, which is like a traditional skin framed boat. And she like I'd sort of been learning these skills, like, oh, I could, name lots of plants. I could go out and make a bow drill fire. I could build a shelter and sleep out in the woods. But there was no tending to the inner world, and it was very much about like, how do we, what are the resources of the natural world? Like, how do we survive in the wild? And that never sat well with me. And then when I met Lynx, there was yeah, just this real emphasis on community and learning these skills as a way of growing a relationship with the earth, and the essential, basically just like how essential it was that they were practiced in community, that they weren't taken out of that context. And she gathered us. She has this beautiful way of facilitation and of creating ritual spontaneously. And she gathered us together in a circle, and we placed the youngest to the eldest in the circle. So the youngest was two, the eldest was somewhere in their 60s, and asked us each individually, what is most important to you in your life at this time? And I just had never been asked that. It's such a simple question, but it really, yeah, it really unlocked a lot of grief in me. And I still remember like holding this talking piece, and I couldn't speak, I was crying so much. Um, but yeah, it really kind of, her teachings brought me on this path of, yeah, much more ancient skills, but also like, what does it mean to practice them in community? What does it mean to really rebuild culture? What does it mean to tend to conflict and grief? Um, and yeah, that's like the third kind of pivotal moment that I can think of, is like my first ever grief ritual, and how that really supported me to unlock and express a lot of the trauma that I'd been holding and a lot of the grief that I'd been holding. Um, yeah, and it felt like this kind of passageway into really being able to hold space for other people in that as well. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Thanks for that answer. Um, Lots of ways it could go. One that I felt pulled by was the significance of an elder, um, because I know the idea of ritual, and the idea of kind of holding circle and these kind of elements, it's becoming more and more popular, which is a good thing because clearly people are saying, "Hey, this is a need," um, and there's almost this. There's like a strong energy I feel with people going, well, this is the need, and we're gonna endeavor to meet that need, which is a really good thing. I guess, and I wasn't intending on asking this, but I'd love to know your opinion. If you could speak a little bit on this, where maybe there's such an excitement about the possibility of this deep need being met that not being it's not being pursued, if that's the right word. Probably not pursued in the quote unquote correct manner, which is that I have this strong feeling that these things, like you said, need to be taught by someone who has been doing them for a longer time, and who's really experienced in this, so we can learn this and then we can share it on. And if we're not invested first in the I almost feel like there's this, we want to go from student to teacher so quickly that,
Mhm.
like, the student's a beautiful place to be. It's like you're like this sponge just soaking it all in. And I wonder, are we taking well, I don't know if we have enough access to elders like you and your teacher, but yeah, I'd love to know your opinion on that, whether we're acknowledging enough the significance of an elder in this kind of pursuit of holding space for people, holding ritual for people.
Ah. Um, yeah, I kind of like I was reflecting on just the very way that you were asking that question as well as the question, like how the way of asking it was kind of reflecting how we are approaching
Yeah.
that as well, of we're kind of surprised by it. We weren't expecting it, and we're kind of fumbling through it and open to, yeah, like to be surprised by it, to kind of yeah, that there's a need to ask that question, and there's a need for those spaces, and there's a need for ritual. And yeah, I see that we live in a culture that like places value on speed, and places expectations on people to like learn things, get a certificate, and then be practicing straight away. That doesn't place value on apprenticeship, that doesn't place value on slow growth, like, or even like, this, so much of my work is observing the cycles of nature, and it's not just this like continued exponential growth that like the capitalist system models, it's like this, growing, expanding, and then contracting and going beneath the ground and digesting and fermenting and composting, so that we know that like there's that, yeah, that the seeds have dropped deeper inside of us. So like I understand what you're asking, and I agree with it in lots of ways, and then I also feel like, yeah, there can be also like a strong hesitancy from people to step into that place as well, which is actually like one of the reasons why a lot of my work has turned to work with adults, because I witness so many adults who don't feel like they have the skills and competency to hold space, that they don't have anything to offer. And then yes, like, oh my God, there's such a dearth of elders, like, and that's kind of one of the sayings in rites of passage work, is lots of elders and not that many elders. Um, but it's like, at what point are we working to kind of support people to step through these transitions from, you know, child to next stage of life, or whether it's adolescent to adult, and how many people get trapped in this eternal place of adolescence, so they feel like their experiences don't mean anything. So yeah, I feel like all of those things are true, and we're kind of like in your question, like really knowing that there's something here, knowing that it's significant, knowing that we don't have all the answers, and that we're going to fumble through and we're going to make mistakes, and that this is multi-generational work, like it really is. Like to decolonize like is not going to happen in our lifetime, but it's like that we can take those kind of awkward, uncertain steps whilst also being deeply I suppose self-reflective and honest with like what are these like dominant cultural narratives that we're internalizing, and how can we be humble, like right, like to me that's like a big part of it. Every time I sit in circle I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Who am I? Like, who the hell am I to be sitting here listening to, all of those things still go through my head. And then it's like you're there and okay, I'm gonna do the best that I can and I'm gonna be as human as I possibly can, that's why I love this work is like I can show up and be like, oh, I have like this really uncomfortable emotion today, like which is so deeply human, and I want you to see me in that as well, like Um, yeah, I'll stop there because I've said quite a lot, but yeah, thanks for that question.
Oh, I appreciate your answer because, as you said, it is nuanced, and it seems like depending on where you are in the kind of field, there's like different issues going on. Um, but yeah, no, I appreciate your answer that to kind of put faith in the sincerity of people who are really seeing that there is the need, and while simultaneously acknowledging the need for eldership, you can also say, well, I'm in this situation now and I feel like I could potentially um, add something to a community in terms of sharing your humanity and sharing our collective humanity, and finding that balance between knowing you need experience, but also um, that maybe there'll always be that doubt in our minds of are we quote unquote qualified or experienced enough.
Mm,
So I do appreciate that. I I want to talk to you about vision quests.
mhm.
Some of the listeners might have never heard of vision quest before. So I was wondering, could you maybe give us a description of what a vision quest is and maybe how you came across it and maybe your own experience with it?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, I guess like language is really important to me, like, and ways of saying things and ways of expressing things. And I tend not to use the word vision quest, um, like because of its associations with Native American culture and
Mm,
like not wanting to um yeah, like not wanting to culturally appropriate, like or take things that aren't mine. And then
mm,
also like I find so like based on the School of Lost Borders, which is the school that I've trained with in holding this work, they use the term vision fast. But I also like take big issue with the word vision, because like people go out onto the land and they're expecting like this huge thing to happen, it's like an eagle passes by and like drops a feather right at their feet and they suddenly realize all these things, and it's not how it goes, it's like you're sitting there. So basically it's a 12-day long ceremony, this particular practice, and within that there are 4 days and nights fasting on the land, with minimal shelter, with water and with no other human company. um, and, with this particular tradition from the School of Lost Borders, which was developed by Meredith Little and Stephen Foster, amongst many other mentors and elders of theirs, there's a focus on, supporting people to clarify and hone their intention before they go out onto the land. Again, which happens in circle, in community, so that they're witnessed in that exploration of why it is that they are choosing to go out on the land for 4 days and nights and fast, because it's not comfortable. Um, and yeah, basically, like, so that they can walk out with my relationship with like intention has changed a lot in the past year, and now I understand it as, walking out with something to introduce yourself to the land with. When you sit down in that place that has called you beside perhaps like the hazel and the river, like who is it that you're going to tell them is there, like, and the ancestors that are there, like what is it that you have to share with them about why you're doing this and what you're stepping into. So yeah, there's 4 days and nights. We encourage people to, work with their intention to, be, um, to practice ceremony, to practice ritual in service of that. And then when people come back across the threshold, we spend 3 days in story council. So that's to hear the stories that have come from the land, essentially, like that. Like to me, that's the most beautiful practice of this is people are just receiving stories from the land. And I'll talk more about that. But we also spend one day speaking about integration, and that's really important to us. And one day never feels like enough, because integration is the longest part of the ceremony, and it's the part that happens without the support of the circle there. And we often talk about it being the most challenging part, and it's also the most beautiful part of like, how is it that you can take what has been shared with you, take what you have realized within yourself and bring it back into your community so that the ripples are felt. That's the kind of practice that we practice here. And I hold this ceremony with my friend and mentor Rupert Marquez, and we hold it always on the same patch of land up here in northwest Donegal. And that's a really beautiful thing because that particular valley where we hold that ceremony was cleared in 1861 over the space of 2 days. So there was 140 families who lived there, and they were cleared as part of that colonial project. So it's a really quiet valley, but it shouldn't be. And we often see like the stone remains of the cottages, like whose thatched roofs were burnt. So like there's a lot of, as on this whole land, there's a lot of story, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of history there. And so then now sending people out onto this land to hold ceremony, when I walk that land, I come across altars that people have made there. I come across trees that I have met through other people's stories. The people of that valley kind of jokingly call us the chanters because every night, like, we go up and sing to the people who are out fasting on the land. So there's kind of like this beautiful relationship that's unfolding between this ceremony, the land, and the community that's there. And that feels really significant to me that like this particular ceremony is in relationship with that and in service of that. That's little few doll threads.
Thank you for that. Can I ask where did you first come across the Vision
Yeah.
Quest, and was there ever a doubt? Because it's quite as you said, it's quite an extreme testing process. I wonder, like, what were your initial thoughts coming up when you heard about it and you thought you were considering it, and then maybe for people listening who are also intrigued, could you maybe speak a little bit to who do you think it is for, and maybe who isn't it for?
Um, it's hard to know where I first came across it, but I spent 4 months with Lynx, and we were practicing these skills. And like a part of that was also like practicing holding ritual together, practicing holding ceremony together. And there was a man who was co-facilitating there called Caspara Brown, and he had, I don't know where he came across it, but basically we did like a 1 day threshold crossing. And I remember just being so excited about it. I was like, this is what I want to do. Like I've been wanting somebody to hold this for me for a really long time. So, I did a 1 day threshold crossing. It didn't have any of these kind of different structures around it of like, working with intention or hearing story. But it was a beginning. And he suggested that I go to a place called Eco Dharma, which is a really incredible intentional community in the Pyrenees who often work with like activists and people who are experiencing burnout from activism, and hold like different work related to nature connection and social and ecological justice. So I went there, and there was they were holding this 12-day Vision Fest, and it was Rupert, who I work with now, who was one of the guides on that. But I knew I was so ripe for it, I was so ready for it. And when I went out onto the land, so it's the Pyrenees, so it was very different landscape to here. It was like lavender and sage growing and vultures. People here joke about me going to do my vision fast in hot countries. They're like, Lucy, like, um, but yeah, I just, for me, it was like this, a feeling of homecoming. It was so, I didn't struggle with the physical effects of fasting. I just felt completely at home and where I was supposed to be. What was challenging for me was the sitting in circle and sharing with people and being witnessed by people. That was the part for me that was really, like really solidified it for me, that made it real. Um, so, yeah, that's where I first came across it. And when I was out there, I had just this very strong, um, realization, understanding that I needed to bring this home. And yeah, I wanted, oak and bramble and badger to be a part of that ceremony as well. So like, yeah, we brought it to Ireland at the end of 2021. So that was the first ceremony that we've held. Um, and in terms of like who it's for, I try, so we invite people to apply, and we ask them like what it is that, why, like what it is that has brought them to this, how it is that they envisage using it in their lives, like what ripples they foresee. They're really difficult questions to answer, but for us, it's a kind of way of, I suppose, screening participants, like, are you suitable? Um, and what we're really looking for is like, yeah, that people feel that strong calling within themselves, that they might be at a pivotal point of their lives. Some people might not know exactly why it is that they're being called to do something like that, but they're called anyway. So it's kind of difficult to say like who it's for. Um I suppose like in terms of our own limitations as practitioners, as guides, like it's difficult for us to, you know, um support people that aren't able to take care of themselves for whatever reason at that time of their lives. Um So, yeah, like I think as guides, we always need to be reflective of like what are our limitations as well, and who we can serve. Um, and like that responsibility as well, because it's kind of like, we've gone from showing kids how to use knives in the forest to sending people out for 4 days and nights without food on the land, so it's risky business, but it's my favorite day of the year is seeing people come back across the threshold, because something's changed, like, and we don't hear the story in that instance, but we see it on their face. And, for some people that can be like, for me, that real beautiful homecoming experience. And for other people, it's really difficult, and it's an opening, like it's not an ending. It's really, it kind of can show people a direction to go, and it can also be, yeah, just like really difficult and really grief filled and really confusing. And to me, that's where the container of the community and of catching those stories and of this practice of mirroring back the story to the person so that they may more fully see themselves in the story as well. So I suppose it's like we are practicing something that, I believe everybody in the world and all of our ancestors understood the significance of at some point, that to go out onto the land, to mark transitional points in our lives so that we are, yes, celebrating, marking, being open to that change that is inevitable. And yet we're doing it within a context that doesn't support that, like people are going back out into a culture that's like, you did what?
Yeah.
You paid money to go and do what? Like,
Or
and like
mad.
isn't it doesn't have the literacy, not everybody has the literacy to kind of hold that. So it's a difficult thing, and we're doing it in the absence of sometimes community, sometimes like like the culture that supports this kind of undertaking. Uh so it's sort of I don't know, like I kind of sit with it all the time of like, what is this for? Like, what are we doing this for? And how is it that we can continue to support this to not just be something that whoever has the privilege to take 12 days out of their lives to go and do, how does it actually become embedded in culture once again, and what does it mean? Like, to hold this work in an urban environment? Like, what does it mean to like communicate this to people who don't, haven't read Marcin Prechtel, like, or whatever it is? It's because I feel the significance of it, and I feel just the humanness of it, to come together in a circle and kind of, go out onto the land and just sit there and experience what happens and come back with a story and sit together in a circle and share our stories. Um, yeah, there's something very ancient about that, and yeah, I feel hopefully something like in service of the wider issues that we're facing in our world today.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I wonder, could you maybe link your experience on Division Quest or Division Fast, or whatever way you'd like to describe it, and your current relationship to the land? Because there's probably a wide group of people listening to this. There might be a group of people that are really attracted to it on an intellectual level, the idea of being really connected to the natural world, but maybe haven't had that felt sense. There might be people who have had like glimpses of that, um, and are interested in more. And I'd wonder, are you able to say, oh wow, because of these particular experiences that are quite extreme, um, I have I have access, or I have the capacity to connect to a non-human uh, life that I couldn't have before. Because I think a lot of people who might be critical of the idea of listening to the land, well, they're obviously very in their head, right? They're
Mm,
obviously never exposed themselves to the particular circumstances and context you need to really connect. Um, and yeah, I wonder if you could speak on that a little bit.
mm, hmm. Um, yeah, I don't even know where I want to start. I I often introduce people to nettles, like, I teach foraging walks, and all of this kind of, my way of being, my way of speaking gets threaded through a lot of that, of course. And generally I spend about 20 minutes talking about nettles with people, and I find like it's such a good gateway because everybody kind of knows a nettle, you know, and everybody has a relationship with nettle, whether it's positive or negative. And I suppose I find it a really useful portal because nettle can kind of break down the assumptions that we have about ourselves or nature or, you know, the land. And when I say the land, I mean that in that kind of all-encompassing way of like, you know, the rivers, the sky, the rocks, the microbes, the bacterias, yeah, all of it. Yeah, and so it's like, how do I reintroduce people to this plant that they are very familiar with and really reawaken them to the deep medicine that nettle holds and the deep teaching that nettle can hold. Um, so that's kind of like one way, you know, I suppose it's that like movement from like the very practical into the sacred and knowing that they're both one and the same. So it might be like, yeah, we eat nettle, we make medicine with nettle, we make string with nettle, we sit with nettle, we observe nettle, we watch like how much diversity nettle supports, just to kind of like widen our vision a little bit. And, you know, as you said, like when there's that preoccupation with like the kind of rational scientific thought of what can be measured, what can be felt, what can be proven, like, you know, it's okay, how do we bring it into the body and like feel in the body and yeah, have like more of a somatic experience with the earth. I don't think there's one way for everybody, you know, like there's so many different portals into relationship with the land, and for some people that can be like, you know, an experience of deep grief, an experience of like deep severance from their life. It can be like the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, just something that like, yeah, it reminds us that we are experiencing this life in lots of different ways and that there's so much that we don't know. And I really love leaning into that place of not knowing and of mystery with people. So like wildlife tracking is another practice. I call it a practice of belonging that I share, and I find that that is a really amazing portal into experiencing the land as this like living, breathing, animate force. Because we're like literally reading the lives of other animals, you know, and developing empathy across these perceived boundaries, you know, okay, like I'm standing here and Fox has been here and Fox has moved like this, and what more can we know about the life of Fox, and what can we wonder about their lives and how they live, and um so I guess like that's kind of the way that I choose to yeah, to kind of bridge that divide for people. And there are, yeah, I kind of trust whenever people show up for something, like particularly something like the Vision Fest, like there can be really just regular people come, you know, and it's yeah, I just feel like it's so for everybody. Um I can't even remember what you asked initially, but I thought I went off somewhere.
No, the answer was perfect because it helped me. I hadn't even written this down, but this is what I did want to ask you. And I guess to make it a bit more political, I'm sure you're familiar with Martin Shaw.
Mhm.
I heard Martin Shaw, I think it was actually with a conversation with Mancan Wagon, and he said something along the lines of, he says, people need to connect to the land that they live on. People need to connect to the story of that land. And people need to almost have extensive periods of time, like an intimate relationship with that land. And he says, the shadow side of this, when these are not met, is, I don't know if he used this exact term, but how I interpret it is ethno-nationalism. And
Mm.
obviously, we see a lot of going on right now in Ireland where we have a lot of people, saying things as if like people are taking away their connection to Ireland. And I think it's very, unfortunately, it shows a real lack of reflection, because the way Martin Shaw speaks about it and the way I hear you about it is that people can't take it away from you. It's either you're investing your time in this or you're not. And I'd love if you could speak a little bit about that.
Mm. Oh, thank you so much for asking this question. It's sadly like so prevalent at the moment, and it's something that I've been really aware of in my work for a long time, particularly since Black Lives Matter movement, when it was, yeah, I became aware that a lot of my following was deeply racist, or well, maybe not a lot, but that there was this that there was a following of people who were following my work because it was like their projection was this idea of like pure Irishness, like whatever
Mm,
that is,
mm,
this identity, and that, um, we've seen that connection to land, mythology, kind of like stories of original people, like weaponized so many
mm,
times,
mm,
um, and that's, to me, it's like even more pressing to define that this is not that, and that this is for everybody, and that we have been continually in motion, and that we have, particularly as people from this land, like, coming from elsewhere and moving elsewhere and constantly in this, movement of like meeting and like mixing of cultures, and like that's why it's so rich, like that's what biodiversity is like
mm,
this meeting of so many what seem like different species that are actually like made up of so many other species, and that are, yeah, mixing, having communications, sharing resources, like having conversation, yeah, just so it's really really significant. And I think I, like, from my own life perspective, I grew up in Belfast, and my mother was kind of that generation where it was just like, uh, I suppose, like identifying away from nationalism, and like that kind of connection with the Irish language, connection with the land, connection with the mythology, all felt deeply politicized to me. It
mm,
was deeply politicized. And so it was just like, I remember growing up and being like, oh, like, no, I'm just Northern Irish, and I'm not Irish, and I'm not British. And, it was like really kind of, how do I find my place here? And then it was kind of like through learning these skills and like a sort of deeper journey of exploring the history of colonization and that part of Ireland as well, to be like, well, this belongs to everybody, like these are skills that all of us have practiced. These are very ancient, and actually, like, my identity is not defined by the borders of a nation state, Um, so like, yeah, I never, I never felt Irish, but like, so coming and learning the Irish language, and, learning about history and learning about culture and learning the songs and learning the mythology has been such an enriching experience. But I can understand as well why equally it can be very isolating to some people as well. Um, so yeah, I think it's really, really important that like now more than ever we're kind of really defining and claiming this way of relating to the land as for everybody, and as needing everybody to kind of continue to, feed into this like fluid nature of life and of folklore. And yeah, I feel like there's so much more that I want to say on that, but I'm mostly just really grateful that you brought it up, because I think it's sometimes something that people aren't really aware of, or don't see the links between why, I might be talking about like connecting with the land and in the same breath, like speaking about white supremacy and how we need to be like aware of it. And it's like, so yeah.
But no, well, maybe because maybe this might help because, for instance, when I listen to some of the people who are like some of the leaders of these kind of ethno-nationalist groups, and what helps me is like beneath, I hear like a lot of the Buddhist teachings would be like beneath anger is always sadness, right? So there's so much anger and hatred, and I try to see beneath that, and beneath that is so much sadness, and I
Hmm.
connect to the sadness in the sense that, one, I mean, obviously the housing situation in Ireland is anxiety inducing, and it makes you feel like, well, I don't have a future. And so that's one thing. But I also feel, because there is an aspect of it, and I hope people don't take me out of context, there is an aspect of it because I'm noticing one particular group, they're always talking about hiking, I mean, connecting to the Irish land. And like, there's one aspect of it that makes me go, okay, so you're there's a part of you that's on the right track here. But like you said, but I guess when you spend more time with the land, you realize that the land is nobody's and everybody's,
Mm.
and it's not for you to say, yeah, you can come in, and no, you can't. And
Mm.
what I think is missing is that, like you said, the kind of container of mythology. Whereas in mythology, there's these like nuanced stories about the land and about the people's relationship with the land. And I don't think there's any real mythology that says there's a tiny group of people that can decide who has access and who can connect to the land and who can't.
Mm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I also feel personally, and like maybe I'm projecting as well, that there's this, they're really talking about Irishness, right?
Mm.
But I rarely hear any of them talk about the Irish language.
Mm.
Um, and why a part of why I admire you is someone who didn't grow up speaking Irish, but you're committed to learning about it because you see a strong, like the Irish language being this portal to deepen the connection to the land. Um, yeah, so maybe you could speak a bit more about that if something real
Yeah, like
similar.
one of the things that I was thinking, thank you for all of that. Like, one of the things I was thinking was also about like this wound of belonging, and like how, so many of those right-wing groups are feeding on that like wound of belonging, like you're angry, you're feeling disconnected, you are
Mm.
like, you know, extreme, like feeling the brunt of like
Yeah,
the inequities of our society.
yeah.
I will give you belonging. I will give you something to stand behind. And great, we'll go out and hike and connect to nature as well. So, yeah, it's like, to me, like, that's like, belonging is a big part of my work of like, how can we belong to the land whilst also being aware of like these shadow parts, as Martin Shaw was saying. Um, and like, um, yeah, you were asking about the Irish language. I really felt like growing up, it was so politicized to learn the Irish language. Like it immediately placed me in danger, actually, do you know? And part of my life was spent in kind of Orange Order land, like we grew up very rural. Well, I was born in Belfast. We moved rurally when I was like 9 years old, and we were the only Catholic family on the road, and I was made deeply aware of that. And it was not, it was deeply like bigoted Orange Order land. So you just kind of kept your head down and tried to assimilate. And for me, like the big connecting force, like was going out onto the land. Like I went out onto the land for safety, and found belonging with the beings that were out there and found understanding with the wells and the hazel trees and the rabbits and things. But so like consciously choosing to start learning the Irish language. Like I remember it wasn't that long ago actually, it was on one of the Kathy Scott, the Trailblazery, the Skull Scarcha online, Irish language journeys, and somebody said the word sasper, like the word for the sky, and I just started crying because I was like, I kind of know the word for the sky, um, and I'm so fortunate here that, where I live, there's free Irish classes in the community centres, and my
Right.
Irish teacher is like beautiful. Like he's a native speaker and he has beautiful Irish, and his Irish is so much, I mean, the language is so deeply embedded into the land. So he's like, this is the word, Caileachí, like, this is the word for witch or hag. And it's also like, people here will greet each other with Walla Chaila. So like, well, witch, like, so the men and women equally will say that to each other. If
That's
you say it to a
brilliant.
woman, you need to be very careful about who it is that you say it to, because can be quite insulting. But he's like, oh yeah, Kailahi is also the name for like the seaweed nets. And then he'd go off on a big tangent. I'm often derailing the class towards talking about seaweed and different words related to the land. But it's like we don't have to go very far from like the words that we're using in our daily life have like this rootedness in some, yeah, connection between human and land, and a word that's also deeply practical but can also like hint towards like the vastly spiritual and mystic connection that we have with the land here. And there's all sorts of people in those classes, like there's people from this area, there's people who are from different countries, and it's so welcoming because, and I was also thinking about that a lot of my work now, like I'm part of Broad na Gaeltachta up here, which is the first LGBTQ pride in a Gaeltacht in Ireland,
Right.
and we just had our third year, and it's such a beautiful festival, and it's like, what does pride look like in the Gaeltacht? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's all, you know, it's pride with like the history of the landscape and mythology and poetry and nature, and yeah, like it's so rich because this land is so rich, and yeah, it's I think about that like in terms of like how is it that we're experiencing the land? Who is it that's sharing about the land and what their intentions are? And like when
Mm.
I learn and relate to the land, like the land is so innately queer, and like really, and not just in the sense of like, oh yeah, like magpies will perform these elaborate courtship rituals with both male and female magpies, or like there are mushrooms that have over 23,000 sexes, but like that it literally like breaks down our ideas about nature, because we've been told very recently that like nature is like this, yeah, like really rigid structure that can be studied, and that this is a species and that's a species, and it's been very kind of, I suppose, taught from the context of a very heteronormative white Eurocentric way,
Mm.
and that actually like what indigenous people have known forever, and that what we I experienced when I learned the Irish language is that it's so much more expansive than that. Like we are so much more expansive than we believe that we are, and like these kind of rigid structures imprison us, like, and so how can we, look to, yeah, that split gill mushroom to learn about like the, innately wild queer nature of this world, or like learn about, been learning a lot about orchids recently, Margarine, Asquilga, and like how they collaborate with fungi in order to grow. And we're learning more about this now, of like trees communicating through the fungal networks, and it's just like, oh, there's so much more. There's so much more to this life.
And what comes up for me is that when you're speaking about the language and when you're speaking about the land and the natural world, there's just this emotions of excitement, of curiosity, of like amazement. And I can't help but think, just to bring it back a little back to the political side, that's what's happening here, like with the ethno-nationalists, is that I don't know if you're engaging with it properly, because anyone
Mm,
that I've really come across that engages with the Irish language on a deep level and with the land on a deep level, it is the exact opposite of kind of trying to put a boundary over or to ostracize it. Or it's like this thing where it's like, oh my God, you got to learn about
mm,
this. Isn't this
mm,
amazing? Rather than, oh no, you don't get to learn about this, you know?
mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love the Mary Oliver quote, instructions for living a life, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, how can we like come back to that way of relating to the land that like through, I suppose John Moriarty would have called it that silver branch perception, like, but like really it's to me it's like that childlike wonder and curiosity and awe. And I learned that from children, like when people talk about, who are your teachers, and I have many, and a lot of them were children, of like the capacity to just, yeah, like create, destroy, reimagine, imagine, create ritual at the drop of a hat, like, have conflict, make up. Just, yeah, they're incredible teachers.
Um, this has been great, Lucy. I have two more questions if you're okay with that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, One was so I came across some articles that basically um, alluded to or was pretty confident in the fact that there is strong Irish history related to what we call now like sweat lodges.
Mm,
And I wondered if you have come across any um, either in mythology or in history itself to give you an idea that maybe something along the lines of a vision quest or a vision fast were done on this island, 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago.
mm. Yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, I believe they were called Tignalis. I think that's how you
Okay.
pronounce it, like the sweat houses. And
Okay.
as far as I know, like in Leitrim, there was a huge, what seemed like a resurgence of the
Yeah.
use of them.
Yeah.
So it has the highest density of these, what were like stone B-skep, style buildings. And the practice was, so I'm really like, there are so many more experienced people to speak to about this, but I can share what I have been told.
Mhm.
Um, is that the fire was made inside the stone building. So it was made all over the floor, which heated the ground, and then it was swept out, and then rushes were placed in, and people would sit on top of the rushes. So I guess like what, from that like tradition, the Native American and Lakota sweat lodge tradition, it would be like hot rocks were brought in also like amongst, I've seen sweat houses like that in Scandinavia as well. But yeah, it was that people would sit on the hot ground, and then the rushes would like, yeah, basically steam them. Um, and then in terms of like things that I've found, like, oh my gosh, if anybody's listening and has found more, I would love to hear it. But there's a recording in Cormac's glossary, great glossary, that's was referring to this. Um, it was a ceremony of Imbus Frusna or Imbus Frusnai. And it was said that people would go into a hut that was covered with skins for either 3 or 9 days, and that people, druids, would chant outside for that time. And when the person emerged from that period of, sensory deprivation, when they saw the light first kind of touch their eyes, when they re-emerged, they would be fed, and the translation says like the red flesh of a dog. Um, so yeah, that's like what I've what I've read and what I have yet to recreate. Um,
But,
yeah.
but nothing in relation to what we understand now as a vision quest or a vision fast.
Well, I suppose there's like this ancient tradition of like Octree or Octra or Imram. So Imram being by sea, Octra being by land, and this kind of idea of like journeying with a question without a destination in mind. So, like, the mythology of the voyage of Bran would have been an Imram, of just like setting out on the land with this like question, but being open to what is offered in return. Um, and like, I suppose I often think of like, even just like, our festivals of like Baltanya, Lunasa, Samhain, Imbolc, like that they are all thresholds of change, they are all like, yeah, not necessarily like we're walking out onto the land for X amount of time, but like demonstrates like our ancestors, you know, well, like deep, 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 a relationship with change and like their dependence on the land for their life and their deep reverence for the land. So like, raising these stones over the space of many generations, like it's kind of that there's so many, yeah, if we were to track this through time, it's like there's so many tracks and signs that show us that our ancestors were deeply attuned in this way. And yeah, our job now in holding this work is like we're not, we can recreate things as much as we are able to, and yet, and then it's like we're also still responsive to what is happening at this time. Like, what
Yeah.
are the ceremonies that are needed for the times that we're living in? And
Yeah.
how do we allow those ceremonies to be emergent with the people, with the land, with the times, so that we're not kind of tied to this is, the one pure way of doing
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
like I'm sure our ancestors through time were constantly changing, figuring out what worked, figuring out like what was needed. So it's like constantly like flexing that, like, our ancestral, gift, like that gift of imagination, that gift of creativity.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's like to pay homage to the deep, rich history and the kind of perspective and practices, but also not to be bound to it.
Hmm.
And maybe some people, like you said, that kind of some people who believe or fall into the purist idea, they can kind of go, well, it has to be like this, and that's why
Mm,
these people can't come. It has to be. And I like that kind of coming together of paying homage to the history, but also just open to adaptation.
yeah.
Um, last question for you, Lucy, was that you know you're obviously someone who is deeply committed to having a flourishing relationship with the natural world, with the land, and you've obviously taken particular measures to give yourself the best chance, right? You're in Northwest Donegal and you're investing in the language as well, which helps you, and you're making this, like you said, your livelihood. Um, and a lot of people might be really inspired by you, but maybe for whatever reason can't follow in the exact same footsteps. And I guess they might like to hear you speak about are you kind to yourself when you feel like you've lost a bit of connection to the land? What's that like? Because a
Mm,
lot of a lot of people in the city can have beautiful moments of like I feel connected, but then Tuesday morning they've lost it, and maybe they
mm,
criticize themselves and they go, "What am I doing?"
mm. Yeah, I mean, I think just to like really humanize myself, like I also binge watch Netflix, like, and I am not like fucking some saint, like immune to, the world, like, and there are times when I'm, yeah, like I'm so much on this path that often I'm working a lot, and it's that kind of like joke of like the nature connection practitioner that like spends very t little time connecting themselves, like because you're so often in that place of facilitating it for others. That like happens to me so often,
Yeah.
Um, so like I I mean I just try to have like a deep love and patience for myself, and also like this yeah, like in the same way that I was just speaking about like not kind of subscribing to this kind of any kind of idea of perfectionism or purism, like, it's like there yeah, I'm always like regardless of what I'm doing, I'm always a part of nature. Like I'm always like life expressing itself in some way. Um and like, you know, if there is somebody like sitting in a city, like throughout my engagement with this work and this way of being, I've always been really clear that like, nature doesn't stop at the city limits, like, and it's like it's intertwined with everything. And it's like, yeah, just like to observe the birds, like just to observe like how a dandelion grows through the cracks in the concrete, just to observe like a tree that's nearby. Like, yeah, there's just like it's all around us all the time. And
Totally.
like, how do we connect with just like our bodies as like this incredible conversation of many different species and beings within us? Like, so I think there's so many different ways to experience that connection, and no one way is the way to witness like what is happening in Palestine at the moment, to witness, to not witness the many genocides that are happening that we're not seeing, to see like how yeah, like how the earth has been exploited, and how we're like apart, and like, we're all connected to those systems of harm. It's like it can be so overwhelming. And there are days where I'm like, I just can't, like there are days where I feel like so defeated, and find it so difficult to kind of, yeah, engage with like that act of hope, really. So I feel like I'm just having a lot of kind of patience towards everybody at the moment, like,
Lovely.
of like we're experiencing things that the human body, the human mind hasn't, you know, evolved to experience as well, like, so I think being able to give our attention to things, to like the small, to the immediate, like as Martin Shaw was saying, like, giving attention to like the nature that is just below our feet where we are, or like, the plant on our windowsill. It's like such a powerful thing to do, like to divest our attention away from like multinational corporations that have no, don't give a shit. Like, so
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's yeah, reclaiming that in a way.
Thanks for that, Lucy. Yeah, I just feel compelled to just share a little bit about how I finished reading Fintan O'Toole's "We Don't Know Ourselves" recently,
Mm,
and he takes considerable time to talk about John Hume and his relationship or his work with the peace process.
hmm
And one thing that was really inspiring for me was the that Fintan O'Toole interviewed John Hume, I think a year before uh, the agreement was signed, and he was really close to giving up. He was
mm,
like really at his wits' end because he was just so bombarded with people from both sides calling him the worst person for even conversing with both sides. And he really just
mm,
wanted peace, and he was just so close. And then it was just really nice for me to read this, obviously, at a time where we've come so far in terms of peace in Northern Ireland. And he
mm,
played such an instrumental role, but it was just a real nice human aspect of knowing, but even here, he was so close to throwing in the towel because it was so difficult. And I felt like
mm,
sharing that when you were talking about, listen, there's nobody who is sensitive that is not feeling overwhelmed at the moment. But this kind of idea that it's okay to feel
mm,
like you're close to giving up. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, but there's still this kind of there is still this source of hope that we can find almost even within this feeling of
Hmm.
throwing in the towel.
Yeah. And I
Mm.
love like the dandelion as a kind of teacher in that,
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
when the mower comes along, they just grow smaller, like they just grow closer to the ground. It's like that kind of like, yeah, that trust and that resilience and that like yeah, community effort that's so essential. There's not going to be any lone wolf heroes in this story. Like,
No,
it's really going to take everybody.
absolutely. Listen, Lucy, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks so much for all your great questions. It's been a really lovely
No, it was,
conversation.
yeah, it was fantastic.